Today's presentation is creating accessible Word, PowerPoint, and PDF documents. We have the honor of having Dr. Valerie Morrison present on this topic. I'll be introducing her in just a moment. You may want to put this on your calendar as well. 2 weeks from today, May 27th, she will also be presenting on the topic of creating alternative text for images, which is just as much of an art as it is a science. That's May 27th at 2 p.m. Next slide. So we use the Zoom platform because it is highly accessible, and we practice what we preach. We have Idilla today captioning for us, and there's two ways in order to access the captions for this. One of them is through the stream text link, which Idilla, if I can have you drop that in the chat, that would be fantastic. And then a person can access that as a third-party application. The second way is to, thank you, Idilla. The second way is to access the closed captions option near the bottom right of Zoom. It says CC. So a person can access the captions in either one of those methods. Next slide. And then this is really important. If you're ever providing a presentation with ASL interpreters, for instance, you as the host or the co-host can spotlight someone, and that's invaluable if you want the ASL interpreter or interpreters to be on screen at all times. It just makes it much easier for the end user if they benefit from ASL. And then whoever is spotlighted will appear in the speaker view. Pinning, any participant can pin any other participant's video at any time and only impacts that participant's display. It's fairly easy to spotlight or pin. You simply hover over the participant you want to spotlight or pin. You select the ... or the ellipsis, and then from that menu you can choose spotlight for everyone or pin. Next slide. And then you're going to be hearing this several times, so I'll make this very short, just a brief overview of Center for Inclusive Design and Innovation. Basically, everything we do, touch, research, is related to disability awareness, accessibility, disability research in some capacity or another. And we provide a number of different services. One of the really important services we provide is our e-text. Making various documents accessible, whether they're PDF, PowerPoint, HTML, EPUB, so a number of different services in the area of e-text, which Valerie Morrison, our presenter today, oversees. Next slide. So a brief introduction for Dr. Valerie Morrison. I've worked with Valerie for several years. She's very detail-oriented. She has years of experience teaching in higher ed, and she really is passionate about making accessible materials for individuals with print-related disabilities. She earned her doctorate in English literature from the University of Georgia and served as an instructor of composition, contemporary poetry, American British literature, and the postmodern novel. Valerie and her team find innovative ways to transform course materials quickly and affordably into a wide variety of accessible digital formats. Valerie and her team work with university staff, publishers, corporations, state agencies, and fairly recently, in the last couple of years, even with the UN, to ensure the materials they create and distribute will be accessible to those who rely on screen readers, text-to-speech software, or other assistive technology to access documents. And with that, I will go ahead and pass it on to Dr. Morrison.
Thank you so much, Johan. I really appreciate the glowing introduction. It always makes me excited to start a presentation. I very much appreciate the kind words. Thank you ahead of time to our captioner. I'm going to try and speak slowly and clearly, but we do have a lot of material to cover today because we're talking about Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, PDFs, and we're also going to look at how to make make files accessible from the very beginning. And at the end, we're going to talk about how to check existing documents for accessibility. So there's a lot to cover, but what I'm going to try and do is, well, I'm going to try and go through everything and leave time at the end for questions. That's my goal. And then also, all of these slides will have step-by-step instructions so that hopefully if you need to go back, you can access either the recording or and pause it to see the slide, or you can access the PowerPoint itself, and it will have step-by-step instructions for all of these tips and tricks I'm going to go through this afternoon. And thank you everyone for making time for this. It's exciting to see there's a giant group of you that have come on a Friday afternoon to hear us talk about accessibility, which is wonderful. So my goals for today, other than making it through all of this material with time enough for questions, I'll first provide an overview of how to create accessible documents. Then we'll go through how to write alternative text description for images with some sample images. Then we will review the basics of PowerPoint accessibility. There are some things unique to PowerPoint that I want to point out. And then finally, we will end with how to check documents for accessibility, both using the accessibility checkers in the programs, and then also I'll give you a list of things to look for in documents that you might inherit or come across and need to remediate or fix. That's what our team does, right? We get all of these documents sent to us in some form of accessibility or inaccessibility, and then we need to make them better. All right, so we're going to start with creating accessible documents. The main programs we're going to talk about in this particular training are Microsoft Word documents, PDF documents, and PowerPoint. Those are the three most requested, and those are the three file types that I think most people in office environments are dealing with on a regular basis. So starting off, what needs to be accessible? I would say everything, every file you touch, but of course I work in an accessibility company. But everything in an educational environment, everything in a health provider or state agency, any kind of files that you are sharing at work or posting online should be accessible so that everyone has access to them and can refer back to the files. You want that content to be accessible to everyone. So here we have an image on this slide of a laptop computer with a PDF file pulled up on the screen. On the left-hand side of the screen are the accessible bookmarks that allow someone using a screen reader or assistive technology to easily jump from chapter to chapter so they don't have to scroll. And on the page itself, you could see it's very small, I'm sorry, but there's some yellow highlighting. So this particular assistive technology is highlighting one sentence at a time as it reads aloud the material for the individual who needs that assistive technology. So everything should be made accessible. So this includes any files, any course material, any health material that's really vital to someone's well-being, any handouts, any PowerPoint presentations, and this includes PowerPoints for meetings or trainings such as today. We want to make sure that that's accessible for anyone who wants to view it. So who needs accessible documents? I want to just first define what I mean by accessible documents. So when I'm talking about accessibility, I am talking about digital accessibility. So that means that your documents and websites are accessible to people who are using assistive technology or programs to read that material out loud. So they could be using a program such as JAWS or NVDA or Claro Read or PDF Aloud. There are lots and lots of different screen reader technologies that people use in order to read their documents aloud to them. So who uses these? Who uses this assistive technology? When I first started working at CIDI several years ago, I thought that the main community that we were serving was people who were blind or low vision, that those were the people that really needed this service. But what I've come to learn over a decade working here is that that's really only about 10% of our orders. The remaining 90% of people who rely on assistive technology for their documents are people who have learning disabilities such as dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, or ADHD. They really benefit from having that material read aloud, reinforcing the content as they look on the page. So they might be sighted, but they also rely on this technology. There are also individuals with head injuries, trauma, cognitive disabilities, people who have temporary disabilities, such as they've broken their arm and so they can't really carry a textbook or page through a textbook. They might need to access their material on a tablet, laptop, or phone. Auditory learners, the aging population really benefits from hearing material read out loud. And I would just say everyone is on their phone these days, accessing their documents and reading online, reading on tablets. And so more and more people are turning towards digital versions of materials. So in this presentation, just to start us off, I want you to think about three main accessibility concepts. The first, is my content easy to navigate? So this is true across any type of file we're working with. We're going to try and make that material easy to navigate and jump from section to section. So creating accessible headings and bookmarks for easy navigation, that's the first concept I want you to really think about, right? Making a document easy to work through, to get through, to jump from section to section. The second concept, are my design choices accessible? And we'll start off talking about that as well, right? Have I chosen fonts, colors, backgrounds that are easy to read, easy to discern, or are you including maybe distracting patterns or animations on slides that make the content a little harder to take in? And then the third concept, overarching concept that I want you to think about in terms of accessibility, are my visuals clearly and fully described? And so we have a whole section today where we're going to look at writing alt text descriptions or captions for images, where you describe the images so that someone who can't see them, or maybe they're not loading properly, but that alt text is going to help them understand the content. So those are your three overarching concepts today. So I'm going to start by talking about these accessible headings for navigation in a Microsoft Word doc. Some of you are probably familiar with the styles and the headings that you can add into a Microsoft Word doc, but some of you might just make a heading, but it's in the old way, right? So for years and years and years, well, until I took this position, when I was an instructor, I would make handouts, or I would have my students make papers, or I would talk about headings, but I was just having them make them bold, or a different font size, or a different font style, so they stood out. So I would want a visual heading. But you also want to make your headings functional. And accessible. So on the home ribbon of Microsoft Word, which I had never seen this before because I just blew right past it, if you open up Microsoft Word, you will see right in the center of the home ribbon is the Styles section. And you can highlight any word or sentence and turn it into a functional heading. So you can have heading level 1, heading level 2, heading level 3. You can have as many heading levels as you want. I recommend sticking with 3 or fewer, depending on how long your document is. Just having a heading level 1 for a one-page document is great. That will allow someone to pull up a list of all the headings, and they can easily jump from section to section. They'll also be able to see the structure of your document due to your headings. You can also automatically generate a table of contents when you're finished based on your headings. So the headings have a lot of functionality, and so that is key. That's one of the first things you want to think about with your documents is how easy is this for someone to navigate, and creating accessible headings is key. So you'll highlight a word or line in your document and select a heading level in the Styles group on the home ribbon. You can also add different levels of headings to provide organizational structure so that people can easily navigate your content. So on this next slide, I have a screenshot of the View tab in Microsoft Word. So we were on the home ribbon. Now we're on the View tab. And in the center top of the screenshot, a red circle is drawn around the checkbox where you can turn on the navigation pane. And down below, you'll see a navigation pane will then appear to the left of your document. And this will list all of your different headings. And if you have different headings, like different levels, like heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, it will show them nested in a hierarchy in the navigation pane. So you could easily see the headings that you're creating by turning on this navigation pane. One reason, or one thing that I hear a lot in doing these trainings or working with people with accessibility is they are, and I'm one of these people too, they are very particular about what their document looks like, and they don't want to sacrifice their style or the visual design, right? So when you do create accessible headings in Microsoft Word, by default, it will change your font to be blue text, and it'll be much larger probably than it was in your original document. But you can easily change it back, and you can specify what you want all your headings to look like in your document. So in this screenshot, I've opened up a dialog box called the Modify Style dialog box, and I've done that by I right-clicked on the heading style on the Home tab, and then it opens up this dialog box, and there's a red arrow pointing to where I could change the color of the font. I can change the font type, the size. I could make all of my heading level 1 bold. And so you could click on every heading style in your Microsoft Word styles section and customize it so that they look exactly the way you want. And then down at the bottom of the screenshot, the font is pretty small, but down at the bottom of the dialog box, there are radio buttons that say you only want these styles to apply to this document, or you want all new documents to have these settings for your heading levels, so that you can set them once and be done with it, and you don't have to worry about how Microsoft Word is going to style these different heading levels. So you can keep your style, but then also add meaningful structure for people using assistive technology. In Adobe files and PDF files, this is a screenshot of the bookmarks pane in Adobe Acrobat. Instead of accessible headings For PDF files, Adobe calls these accessible bookmarks, but they function the same way, and they allow someone to easily click on one and jump to that section for easy navigation. So if you have Adobe Acrobat and you would like to add some bookmarks, you highlight the text and you can right-click and add a bookmark, or you can highlight the text and press Control plus the B key, and that will create a bookmark for you. And one advantage in Adobe bookmarks is that you can then change what the title is or edit the wording. So in this example, I have a screenshot here of a textbook with bookmarks, and I have my main bookmark with the title at the top, and then underneath I have the acknowledgments, table of contents, and introduction, all of that front matter that occurs in a book. And then I've added in the words chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, so it makes it even more clear, the navigation. Right, so you can edit a bookmark to include extra navigational tips for the user. To adjust the hierarchy, when you create a bookmark, they will all be on the same level. There's no way to say, I want this to be a bookmark 1 or a bookmark 2 like you can in Microsoft Word. But once I make the bookmark, I can drag them up and under a parent bookmark so they appear indented and someone gets a better sense of the organization and the hierarchy. Continuing on talking about our accessible design features, right? We've talked about accessible headings. Now I want to move towards some design concepts. Across the board, you should have fonts that are large, readable, and you want to avoid having too many stylistic details to your fonts, which I'll talk about in a minute. So we have a screenshot here on the slide on the right where I've put the name of our company in several different examples of different fonts. The top 3 are Calibri, Arial, and Verdana. These are what are called sans serif fonts. And when you're reading a large, you're reading a lot of text, these are the most readable. They are the most easy to understand what the letters are, and they don't have serif, which is why. So a serif is a stylistic flourish or end stroke on a letter. And if you could see these bottom 3 examples of Times New Roman, the Georgia font, which I think is the most beautiful personally, and, you know, Georgia Tech, woo, you know, and then the script font. These are all examples. These bottom 3 examples are all serif fonts, and they have these end strokes on the different letters, these little flourishes and details on the ends and the tops of letters. And these get a little bit harder to read. And so we would recommend sans serif fonts are best, such as Calibri, Arial, Verdana, and Geneva. You also want to make sure that your font size can be read by most readers. Some people who are low vision, they might be magnifying the text with different programs or software, or they might have a screen magnifier that they put over their monitor. And so you want to give them a chance to read it, make your font large enough. So if it's a Microsoft Word doc, I would recommend 12 point or larger. For all of my PowerPoint training videos or presentations, my PowerPoint slides, I try to go 24 point or larger, just so that it is visible for someone. And if you're projecting it, people in the back of the room have a chance at reading it. Cramming a lot of material on one slide makes it harder for people to read. So you want to try to break things up and have less text on each slide that's larger for best practice and accessibility. You also want to avoid large amounts of styled text. So that means if it's italicized, bold, underlined, or capitalized. The reason you want to avoid that is it just becomes harder to recognize the word shapes and letter shapes when you do that. So if you could imagine if there's a whole paragraph where the letters are all caps, all letters are capitalized, it takes more cognitive power to read that than when you have uppercase and lowercase letters. So those are some ideas about creating accessible fonts. You also want to create accessible spacing. So if you are making a Microsoft Word doc, try to avoid hitting enter, 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 or tab, tab, tab in order to create white space. Instead, you can use the paragraph settings, the paragraph tools and the built-in tools in Microsoft that allow you to create this white space. So the reason why I'm recommending that is that someone, depending on what program they're using to access the document, it could read those read those as blank line, blank line, blank line, and someone might think that they've reached the end of the document. So instead, you can use the paragraph settings on the Layout tab to add space before or after a line. And this screenshot here shows you on the right-hand side, you can, right down in the right-hand corner, you can add space before or after a line that you've selected that will add in white space in an accessible way. You can also insert page breaks or section breaks or alter your margins on this tab that allows you to change your layout without doing too much of the enter, 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 tab, tab, tab. I was guilty of this for years because I want my documents to look a particular way, and I did not know that there were all of these wonderful built-in tools for me to use. Another very important feature when it comes to your text and your design choices is the idea of color contrast. So color contrast should reduce eye strain. That is the #1 goal. So you want a large contrast ratio between the color of your text and the color of your background. I have worked with many, many graphic designers who make beautiful documents, maybe not the most accessible, because a lot of graphic designers are interested in, I'm oversimplifying and generalizing here, but I think the trend in recent years has been to make design choices that are very subtle, lots of pastels, lots of very quiet, muted colors. And when you have that design aesthetic, often it's hard to read the text. So the most accessible contrast would be yellow text on a black background. That reduces eye strain the most, and that just happens to be Georgia Tech colors, just saying. But black on white is great. Dark blue on white background is wonderful. I once went to an accessibility conference where someone had a PowerPoint. The keynote speaker had a PowerPoint, and it was black text on a gray background. And I sat in the very front row, and I could not read a word. They also used a script font, which was another issue. So you want to make sure that the design choices you're picking are making that content readable for everyone. I have a screenshot on this slide of a color contrast analyzer from the Paciello group, which is a free tool that you could download, and I have a link here, thepaciellogroup.org. You could download this color contrast analyzer tool and test your font colors, and it will show you how accessible your different color choices are. The one last thing I want to say about picking colors in your documents is not to rely on color coding alone to convey meaning because there are people who are colorblind for various different colors. Some people can't see red, green. Some people can't see blue. There are lots of different types of color blindness out there. So if you are relying on color for meaning, make sure that you have some other way to code that information so that people who are colorblind know which words or sections you're calling out with your colors. So moving on, I would like to talk a little bit about alt text for images and adding alt text. And if you all want to access the chat, I'm going to have a sample in a minute or two that allows people to type in some practice alt text. I have an image that I'd like you all to try describing with me. But before we get to it, I want to just kind of explain in Microsoft Word and PDF how you would enter this alt text. So for Microsoft Office, for both Microsoft Word and PowerPoint, to add alternative text, you can right-click the image and choose Edit Alt Text, and a field will appear that you can then type your description in. Depending on which update of Microsoft Word or Microsoft Office that you have, if you don't see the Edit Alt Text option when you right-click on the picture, then you can right-click, select Picture, and then click on the Alt Text tab. It's an extra couple clicks, but it'll get you to where you need to go. And in the screenshot, we see an image inserted into a Microsoft Word doc file. The image is of Van Gogh painting. And then on the right, I have opened up the alt text pane where I can then type my description into that field. When I describe this image, I want to use proper grammar, spacing, and punctuation. I'm using regular capitalization of a sentence, right? So I would describe this as Van Gogh's painting irises, painted in such and such a year, which I can't remember right now. But I would have a brief description that I would type out in sentence format. The reason that we recommend that you use regular capitalization and punctuation is that screen readers are very sophisticated, and people who are used to using them can hear the different pitch and tones and spaces built in. The screen reader does pause with punctuation. It does heighten the pitch if there's a capital letter. And so we want to make sure that this is read just as normal content. When you type in your description, do not use hard line breaks to create separate paragraphs. You want everything in 1 or 2 or 3 sentences all together. If you hit enter to create a new paragraph, depending on the person's settings, it might stop reading and just jump to the next thing. So you want everything together in one paragraph. So this is the same with Microsoft Word and Microsoft PowerPoint. If you were adding alt text to a PDF file, we use Adobe Acrobat as our PDF editor program. If you need to add alt text to an image in Acrobat, you are first going to click on Tools and then select Accessibility Tools, and then you'll be able to turn on the Reading Order tool. And then this screenshot on the right-hand side shows a page of a PDF file where every object has been highlighted, all the text and all the figures have been highlighted, and you'll see these 2 figures on the page of a skull, a dinosaur skull, and a pterodactyl are both surrounded by a border with a big X through them. So it shows me these are the figures that need alt text. I can then right-click on each image and type in my alternative text. Another method for adding alt text in all three of these programs that we're talking about today is you could run the accessibility checker, which I'll show you later on. And once you run the accessibility check, it will flag all of the images that are not described and allow you to click on them and add alt text there. So that's another workflow method if you prefer. So here is my sample image that I would like us to try and describe together. For any image, what we do in the e-text department at CIDI is we try to start our image description with one overview sentence that names what type of image we're looking at and gives a broad overview of the visual impact and what we're seeing in that photo or in that image. So you want to first summarize what you see in one general informative sentence. Then if you want to add details, you can do that in a later sentence. We really want to keep our description neutral and informative. We want to use proper grammar, spelling, and punctuation again. And then we want to avoid any acronyms or symbols because we don't know exactly how that will be read out by all of the different assistive technology screen reading software choices out there. So if this were if I wanted to say the U.S., I would probably write that out as the United States, just to be most clear, best practice. So in the chat, if anyone would like to try writing an alt text description, how would you describe this for someone so they could access it and have the screen reader read it aloud if they couldn't see this image? And I'm deliberately not describing it for this exercise. I'll get into describing my the image on this slide after we have a couple people try. And if anyone wants to unmute themselves and try describing this image, I'm open to that as well. Okay, I'm just going to read these aloud for people. So Dana has participated. Thank you, Dana. A large white cat is superimposed lounging in a coastal cityscape. Beautiful. Lakita, a giant white cat is laying on a building in a city. This shows a cityscape on a waterfront. It has modern buildings, trees, and mosques. There is an oversized cat, larger than buildings, sitting on top of the city and leaning back. There is a ferry boat in the water. Audrey has said an oversized white and gray cat is lounging along the coast of a busy city. Then Christy, photograph of a city with a very large cat leaning on a building. The city is surrounded by water and includes buildings. Okay, all of these are excellent. Some are Becky's is much longer than some of the others. I think the way I would describe this is an image of an enormous cat that has been photoshopped into a cityscape, and it is lounging, it is resting on a building on one shoulder, something like that. I also had, I've had lots of people interpret this image in so many ways. For those who can't see the image or who are just listening to this presentation, this cat is so big, right? So when you're calling it giant or very large, I don't know if that's adequate. It is huge. Some people have suggested that you call it a meme so that people know right away that this is maybe a joke photo or a created image. It's a photoshopped image, which is why I include Photoshop. I think the idea that it is so large that it is resting on a building makes that clear. I'm trying to keep my description neutral. I want to say a lot about the big floofy belly and how silly it is that it's just kind of gazing off into the distance, but I left that out of my description. just for the purpose of describing something briefly for an audience, hitting on the fact that it is maybe a doctored image, a photoshopped image, talking about the cat right away. I've also had people, when I've given trainings in person, who spent so much time describing the beautiful city in the background, which is Istanbul, by the way, or Constantinople. I've had people describe the mosques and the water and the boats and the people and the billboards and the buildings, and they forgot to mention the cat. I've also had people who were sitting in the back of an auditorium who, and I'm just going to ask people to mute. Thank you. I've had people, when I've given this training in person, they were sitting in the back and they didn't even see the cat. And so when we were, that's totally okay, thank you. When we went through this exercise, they were so confused about why people kept talking about a cat. And they thought that they couldn't see the cat from far away. They thought that these back paws down near the waterfront were buildings on fire, and this whole giant body was smoke clouds, and the top part of the cat kind of faded into the tree line. So it's important to describe images not only for accessible digital files, but also very important for when you're giving a presentation in the room to describe your images, because people might be sitting far away or behind a pillar, or they might be looking down taking notes. So describing your images is best practice for accessibility. I have a question here. When you convert a PowerPoint or Word document into a PDF, yes, it does create alt text. It does retain that alt text in your PDF that you save. So anything that you do in Microsoft Word to make your file more accessible, such as adding headings, creating accessible spacing, your font colors, your alt text, all of that will be retained if you then save as an accessible PDF. So building from the ground up, if you are creating these Microsoft Word documents, it really helps to make them accessible from the start. All right, excellent participation. Thank you all for doing that, for working through that with me. All right, so moving on to some examples of different image types, just to give you a sense of accessible alt text. Here's an example of a person. I would just put the person's name. I wouldn't go into too much detail about the pose, the clothing, the black and whiteness of it all. I would just name the person. Simple graphics can also be described in one sentence. In this example, a magnified image of the human coronavirus. You can add additional details if you want, depending on your context or your audience. So if it's for a biology textbook, for example, you could talk about what these different structures are, but otherwise I would just try to keep things brief. And we'll talk a little bit about auditory fatigue and why I advocate for keeping things brief in a moment. Here's an example of a bar graph. So to create alt text for a bar graph, you want to work from general to specific. Again, that first sentence, you want it to do all the heavy lifting. So I would begin by naming the type of graph and the title if it has one. Then I would describe what's on the vertical and horizontal axes. And then I would describe the data last. The reason I want to name the graph first is because maybe the person listening doesn't need to know all the data points in this graph. So if you start out by either having a caption that describes the data in the graph or having alt text that gives an overview of the data in the graph, then the person listening can decide to listen or skip ahead. And so here I have a description of this graph that I've started. If I thoroughly described all the data points, it would take an extra paragraph or two. But in this example, I have a bar graph titled U.S. population by race that compares the percentages of Black, Hispanic, white, and other races in the United States for the years 1990, 2000, projected 2025, and projected 2050. In 1990, there were 76% white, 9% Hispanic, 12% Black, and 3% other. And then if I were to continue and describe every single bar, I would just describe it in the exact same format, just to make things very clear and easy to follow. When you are writing your alt text for images, remember to focus on meaning and don't get too caught up in appearance. So in this example, I have a chemical reaction on the right-hand side, and there are red squiggly arrows and straight blue arrows. And for someone listening, it doesn't really matter what color the arrows are or whether they're wiggly or not. So you want to focus on the meaning and less on the appearance. So for example, in this image, you would want to avoid describing, quote, a ball labeled with a plus sign, and instead, and I had to kind of read the textbook to learn this, instead you should call it a positron. Avoid describing a squiggly arrow labeled with a weird Y, and instead call it a gamma ray, right? So you want to focus on what these symbols mean and not get too hung up on what the different symbols appear to be. That makes it much easier for someone to comprehend what the image is trying to convey. That also helps people in processing the information, right? So if you're focusing on meaning and not including those extra details, it helps someone move that information from their working memory into their long-term memory. So cognitive load, it's also referred to often as auditory fatigue, is a concept to consider when you're describing images. Cognitive load, you want to think that a person only has about the capacity to carry about 7 concepts in their head at one time before they start dropping off, right? So just, I imagine it as someone holding a bunch of logs, and then once you get more, once it gets too heavy, those logs start all dropping, all of them. So you don't want to overwhelm someone with too much detail. That's why we say best practice is to keep your alt text brief whenever possible. So in this example, I have a very big, complex infographic with a lot of information on it. I would, again, begin with the type of image. It's an infographic. I would then focus on the title and give an overview, a one-sentence overview that provides a general summary of the content. Then I would work from general to specific, filling in the details as needed. So depending on where this is appearing, what kind of document it is, what your audience would need from it, you could either describe this as one sentence, a complex infographic titled Universe Infographic Elements with the following sections: temperature on planets, Milky Way galaxy structure, moon expedition, and then I would just continue to list all the sections. Or you could break this into different parts. You could include tables with all the data underneath, or just have a very, very long alt text description, depending on your audience. But we would recommend trying to keep things brief due to auditory fatigue. All right, I would like to move on to PowerPoint accessibility. There are a few key elements to PowerPoint that are really important when you are making your slides accessible to everyone. The first is templates, using the accessible templates and layouts. that PowerPoint has built in to their program. On the Home tab, you can select Layout, and that's what I have in my screenshot here. I've gone to the Home tab, I've selected Layout, and then I'm going to select a design template that has as many accessible placeholders as I will need. Something that is a holdover, I think, from the 90s, not to date myself or anything, but when people first started using PowerPoint at work or in their lives, I'm not sure what you all do in your, but I used it at work. So people were inserting text boxes whenever they needed them on the fly. The problem with inserting text boxes is they're often skipped by screen readers. So if you insert a text box and you don't use the accessible placeholders in the layout pane or the accessible layout choices available to you, 90% of the time the screen reader will not read that text aloud, unfortunately. So please play around with these layouts. You can always pick a layout that has a ton of accessible placeholders and then delete the ones you don't need. You could resize them, move them around, but you want to use the placeholders in the layouts. You don't want to insert a text box. In order to check to see if your text is accessible and will be read by the screen reader, you can turn on the outline view. Normally we have the normal view. When you have PowerPoint open, the default will show you all the thumbnails of your slides on the left-hand side. But if you select outline view, you could see in the screenshot, it's listing all of the different slide titles and all the text that will appear on each slide. Pictures or tables do not show up in the outline view. So if you see a slide that just has the title and it's blank, you could click on it and it's probably just, it has an image in it. But it's also great to check because you could see here if your text boxes, if that text is not showing up and it will not be read aloud by the screen reader. You can also use this outline view to delete any extra blank lines. Again, pictures and tables will not appear, but this is a great place to check to make sure all your text will be accessible. You also want to make sure that you have unique and descriptive slide titles. This is a very key point for PowerPoint accessibility. PowerPoint does not allow you to have headings or bookmarks like the other programs that we've talked about, Microsoft Word and Adobe PDF, but your slide titles are how people can navigate your content, and they can pull up a list of all the titles. So the more descriptive and unique your titles are, the better organization and navigation tool they will be for someone using assistive technology. I can't tell you how many slides we've been given where it's just introduction part 1, introduction part 2, introduction part 3, or genetic information part 1, genetic information part 2. If you could be more specific in your slide titles, it will really help someone, especially if they're going back later to access the PowerPoint. It will be more helpful for them to find what they're looking for. The next thing that's unique to PowerPoint is you can select the reading order for all the objects on your slide. We try to recommend that people include as few objects as possible. Someone accessing a PowerPoint with a screen reader, they need to hit Tab to hear every single object read aloud. So if you have 20 placeholder or 20 objects on the slide, they're going to have to hit Tab 20 times in order to make it through. So we advocate for making your slide simple with just a few objects on each slide. If you go back and look at these slides that Johan and I have put together, we usually try to just have a title, a main text box, and one image on every slide to keep things very simple. By going to on the home ribbon, if you go to the drawing section and select Arrange Selection Pane, it will open up the selection pane, and this screenshot shows you there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 images, or sorry, 5 objects on the slide, and then you can drag them up and down with arrows and place them in the correct reading order that you want someone to access them. The thing that is strange about the selection pane is that the thing that will be read first is at the bottom of the list. So you want to make sure that your title is always at the bottom of the list. It starts down here. So it'll read the title, the text. This is probably more text, and then the pictures last, and then you can reorder them. A great way to check how something will be read in what order is you can go to the slide, select all, Control A, and then tab through the different elements, and it will highlight them in the order that someone tabbing through with screen reader will read. If you have fewer objects, the reading order becomes less important because you know, it's less opportunity for things to be out of order. And then one of the last things I want to talk about with this, with PowerPoint accessibility specifically, is when you have objects that are overlapping on the slide, it will be read aloud by some screen reading software. It will start launching into the dimensions of each box. So when we are finished with creating a PowerPoint, we like to select all objects on every slide and then see where they're overlapping. And then you can drag the corners of the different placeholders to make sure they're not resting on top of one another. That will make sure that the screen reader won't go into panic mode and start reading the descriptions. You also want to resize placeholders so they completely contain the text. And in this screenshot, I have an example here down at the bottom of where the text goes beyond the placeholder. You can drag this corner in order to make sure that all the text fits, and then the screen reader will have a better experience. Also, in all of your files, be it Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, or PDF, you can add metadata in the properties. And so you can add an accessible title and add an author, and that helps people trying to find files. It will be read aloud, and it helps them find their documents better. Also, if you upload these onto a website, it will help people find them in a search engine. And then again, if you do this at the Microsoft Word or PowerPoint stage, if you save it as an accessible PDF, that metadata will be retained in the new version. And then I want to talk a little bit about table design. And I know I still need to get to the accessibility checking section. I want to make sure I leave 5 or 10 minutes at the end for questions. So I'm just going to talk very briefly about tables and accessibility. I could do a whole presentation on table accessibility, but this is an example. Here I have a screenshot at the bottom where I've inserted a table into my slide, and this is a very accessible example of a table. It has bold color contrast, so the text is easy to read. It has a clear column heading on each column, and every data cell relates back to that column header. So a lot of times we see people create tables just to kind of format text, right? And not everything falls under that table heading, or often headings will be merged and there's not an equal number of cells in each column and row. The more regular you could make your table, the more accessible it will be for someone listening to the data of that table. A screen reader is going to read aloud each column and row number before it reads the contents of that cell. So the more regular you could make it, the better. So try to avoid merging cells, excuse me, whenever possible. To insert a table on your slide, you could either copy and paste it from a document, or you can insert it using the Insert tab, excuse me, using the Insert tab of PowerPoint, and then build it and choose the colors and the heading rows and add cell borders to make it optimized for accessibility using the Table Design tab. The Table Design tab only appears once you have a table on your slide, just FYI. I've had people ask me, I don't see a Table Design tab. You have to click on a table in order to access it. And then one other thing I'd like to advocate for with accessible tables is that you consider adding structural alternative text description to your tables. For this example, this screenshot of a table, this isn't the most accessible table. I would like to see borders to separate the data. That would help visual learners make it more accessible. Also, there's something missing. This very first cell is blank. And so in the alt text that I have written for the structural alt text for this table, I've added it back in just so someone knows what this first column is all about. So here in my example, alt text, I've described this as table 10.1 is titled Physical Properties of the Giant Planets. It has 5 columns and 13 rows. The column headings are physical property, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. So that's a very snapshot overview. I haven't gone into all the data, which is fine, but my alt text has given someone a heads up about what this table contains, and they can then decide whether they want to listen to the rest of the table or access all of that data. All right, finally, how to use the accessibility checkers, and then I want to leave you with how to use your own skills and your own tips that you've learned today to check items, to check files for their accessibility. So this slide has a screenshot of the accessibility checker tool in Microsoft Word. Microsoft Office operates the same. So this is what it looks like in Word. This is the same as it'll look also in Microsoft PowerPoint. So in order to access the accessibility checker, you will go to the Review tab and select Check Accessibility. If you're working with an older version of Office, there are a couple of extra clicks, and I have them listed here in this second bullet. You'll need to click on the File tab, then click on Check for Issues, and then select Check Accessibility. And it will run an accessibility report like you see an example of on the right-hand side. It will list all of your errors, warnings, and tips, and give you examples, give you information down below about why to fix these issues and how to fix them. You definitely want to click on and fix all of the errors. Those are the most egregious accessibility issues. And then the warnings and tips, you can check them out and see if you want to make the changes. But an example would be a merged cell in a table, an infrequent headings in a document. You may not, depending on whether you created the document or not, you might not have the ability to change that. But you definitely want to add any alt text that's missing, make sure that you have header rows on your tables, etc. So the accessibility checker will open in a separate pane. It will list all the errors and warnings, and then it'll show you how to fix it. If you open up underneath if you open up to view all of these errors, you could click on each image or table missing alt text or all the problems, and it will take you to that part of the document where you can fix it. Here is an example of the accessibility report in Adobe Acrobat if you want to check a PDF for its accessibility. In order to generate an accessibility report, you will open up Tools, then you'll select Accessibility Tools, and then you can click on Full Check, and it'll take a minute, and then this screenshot shows you an example of the accessibility checker options. And then once it runs the report, it will generate a list, just like we saw on the previous slide, where it shows you all of the images missing alt text, if you have color contrast that needs to be addressed, if you're missing bookmarks, if there's a problem, if you haven't specified a language, it'll show you how to do that so that you can optimize your accessibility of your PDF. And then finally, I want to just kind of recap everything that we've talked about today. If you did not create your document from scratch with accessibility in mind, if you have inherited a document, or you've been given a PowerPoint and you didn't make it and you want to make it more accessible and fix it, some key accessibility features to look for. Those three concepts I talked to you about before. Clear navigation with headings or bookmarks. So you want to open the bookmark tab, or you want to turn on that navigation pane in the view tab. You want to check for text that can be highlighted to make sure that it's not just, if it's a PDF, sometimes when you get a PDF, every page is just a picture of text. So as long as the text can be highlighted, you have a fundamentally accessible file to work with. If you don't have text that can be highlighted, you might need to go back to the owner of that document to get the Microsoft Word file to generate a new accessible version in PDF format. Or you can perform what we do, which is optical character recognition. You might have heard of OCR. And that allows you to translate the file from a picture of text to actual highlightable, accessible text. You want to make sure that text can be selected in a logical reading order. So using your cursor to move through the file, you'll want to try to highlight things and make sure that it's reading in a correct order. There's not a lot of interruption of the main body text by graphics or page numbers, or you want to make sure that it reads from top to bottom, left to right as much as possible. And then finally, make sure you check that all the images have been described for people. This is really helpful for individuals who are blind or low vision, so they have access to all the important information and content. It's also important for people accessing your content online or on a phone. They might not load the images, so alt text is going to be key for those users as well. And then a final note, if you are uploading your wonderful, beautifully produced, accessible documents into a learning management system or into some database or into some customer portal or of some sort, always test the documents after you put them there to make sure they're still accessible. Because sometimes when you upload documents to a database or an LMS, a learning management system, it might lock it down and undo all of the accessibility work you did. So make sure you check them. All right. So that was a lot of material to get through. We have some questions. John, did you see any questions come through?
Yeah, you've done a great job answering a lot of them along the way. This one's from Dana Lloyd. I don't know if you answered this. I don't believe so. In the Van Gogh example, would you only describe it as Van Gogh's irises, or include something like large bouquet of irises in a white pitcher?
That is an excellent question, and it really depends on your context and your audience. So if I were describing that image in this PowerPoint, which is a training on accessibility files or accessible files, I probably wouldn't even describe the painting itself. I would just say um, an example of an image inserted into a Microsoft Word document and the alt text field where you could type in your description. But if I were describing that image alone, just the Van Gogh painting, and it was for an art history class or a social studies, humanities, history, biography, whatever my context or audience is, I'm going to focus on different aspects of the painting, what it looks like, the style of it, the colors, the overall appearance of it, the history of the painter. So depending on your context, what you focus on in your alt text is going to change dramatically.
Okay, great. And then Lakita Jackson asks, when writing our description, should we use, quote, a drawing, a painting, a photograph, or just an image?
That is a great question. So when I am describing images, I try not to start by saying an image or a photograph because the screen reading software is going to announce each image with the word graphic. So they already know that it's a graphic, and I think it's a little repetitive, redundant to then say an image or a photograph right after they've heard graphic. So if it's just a photograph, I would skip that part and just describe what's in the photograph. So I would say coworkers in an office environment. But if it's a specific kind of graphic, I would start with a description. So I would say a bar graph or a line graph or a timeline. So if it's a specific type of image, I'm going to begin with naming it. If it's just a regular photograph, I might skip that part.
Very thorough answer. Dana Lloyd asks, there are sections in PowerPoint. Do those show an outline view and contribute to accessibility?
There are sections in PowerPoint. I'm not quite sure what that question is about. I know that I have title slides in my own presentation for like writing alt text. I've created sections by having those slides, and on those slides in the outline view, they just have the title. But I'm not sure how to create sections other than just having a slide with a title.
Hi, Valerie. This is Dana, and I probably can't describe how to do it. I stumbled upon it, but you can create a section break and then link slides together to remain in that section. But I've never looked to see if it showed up in the outline and if that would help to translate, but it is a feature.
That is fascinating. I will have to have my team research that and test it. I'm initially wary because adding more complexity often means making things more inaccessible, and I would be afraid that it would be extra clicks for someone to access the material if you section it that way, but it could be great. So I really would have to test that out and to find out more information about that.
Valerie, if I can add to that, saving it as a PDF might also create a host of issues. If you're putting page breaks within a PowerPoint, it may not be a clean export to PDF, but I would lean more toward what Valerie is saying as well, that the more complexities and details you incorporate into it, it may also not be backwards compatible with older software applications either. So just my thoughts on that initially. And then Christy Fuller asks, what is your guidance regarding including alt text for images that are included solely to make the document look more visually interesting or dynamic? It seems like the accessibility checker suggests to not include alt text. Is that a best practice?
I believe so. So there, I just want to make one clarification. That's an excellent question. I want to make one clarification. So there are some images that we look at and we say, okay, this is a decorative image only. It has no function. It's just there to be beautiful or provide a little extra fun on the slide or on the page. So we do not describe those. We leave them blank, and Microsoft has kind of flirted with the idea of allowing us to mark some images as purely decorative. And when you have that option and you can click that box, it will not even announce that there's a graphic. It will just skip it. So that's wonderful. If it is a purely decorative image, we leave it blank, or we mark it as decorative when we have that option when it's presented to us. I think recently that update from Microsoft Office has been taken away. We don't get the option to mark things as decorative anymore, and so we just leave them blank. The clarification I want to make is that sometimes there are very simple graphics that do have a function. So they might function as icons for like different sections or resources. So often we are remediating textbooks at CIDI, and a textbook might have, website resources icons, or think about it icons, like a little light bulb. And so we just describe those very briefly throughout the text so someone knows, oh, this is that icon again. And it does have a function, but it's not purely decorative.
Excellent. Thank you, Valerie. I want to be respectful of everyone's time on a Friday afternoon, including Idilla's, our captioner. It's
Yes.
3:20. Boy, Valerie crammed a whole lot of information into a short amount of time. This is being recorded. The archives, including the transcripts, the accessible PowerPoint, and the recording is all going to be shared with Christy Fuller, and she will make that available to you and your team as you want to maybe review this information and refer to it in the future. So thank you so much to Valerie Morrison for a great presentation. She clearly has a lot of expertise with the topic, but also her training and teaching really shines through every time I hear her present. So big thank you to Valerie, and big thank you to all of you for hanging in there on a Friday afternoon. So I hope you enjoy your weekend. And with that, Valerie, any parting words before we close it out?
No, just please go forward and spread the information. We're happy if you share this training, if you want to share this recording or this PowerPoint with your colleagues, because the more materials that are out there that are accessible, the better. And thank you all for hanging in there. I'm sorry I went over a little bit. But thank you, John. Thank you, Idilla. Thank you, everyone, for the great questions and participation today.
Excellent. And with that, we'll go ahead and close it out. Have a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.